we'll do the live thing first. Like, hey everybody, welcome back to the Bigmark podcast. I'm your host, Bigmark. If it's your first time listening, welcome. If not, welcome back. Like I always say, wherever you're listening, please rate the podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, like the video, follow along, subscribe to our channel. Wherever you're listening, please recommend it to your friends. If it's on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever, give us that review. If you give us a 5-star review, it really helps us in the old algorithm scenarios. Like we always say, please reach out to the podcast if you ever wanted to give us a new topic, or just drop a line. Hit us up on our DMs on our Twitter or Instagram at the Bigmark Pod or at the Bigmark Podcast. Yeah, if you ever wanted to donate to the podcast, check out our Patreon, patreon.com/thebigmarkpod. And again, thank you so much for listening. I appreciate every one of you. Y'all could have been anywhere in the world and you decided to spend some time with us here, and I'm super excited. And I'm super excited to talk about today's podcast because I feel like it's kind of one of those podcasts that's going to kind of stem probably into many other podcasts, or at least a few other touch points. Let's just put it that way. But the way I look at it is, I was kind of thinking about trying to just focus on this one topic that we'll go into today. I kind of wanted to focus on the two guys that are really involved with it, but I realized as I was kind of putting together today's episode that, there's so much to talk about that basically I'm not really going to get too much covered, other than really essentially scratching the surface, and also going over more or less kind of like the main reasons why we should start to question, or at least start to give some credence to the people who are out there that are questioning mainstream human history. As we know, it's always hard with history. We don't really know, just even like relatively recent history, like back to World War II or further, as the years go on, it's obviously hard to really understand exactly what went down in history, especially ancient history. Now I'm talking like early humans, cavemen, like all that shit, like all that. Every year it kind of seems like we're finding new evidence that pushes that timeline back 100,000 years, 150,000, 200,000, where every time that time extends, it leaves more and more room for questions about what was really going on back then. So the two main characters are people or researchers or figures that are out there that are going to be a major part of this story are Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson. And I mentioned these two, and they're amongst many others that are questioning kind of mainstream theory. And I mentioned these two because the first time I ever heard them was on Joe Rogan's podcast, The Joe Rogan Experience, and I think I might have actually heard Graham Hancock on his own before. But actually, anyway, the first time I heard Randall Carlson and Graham Hancock together, I found their theories and their ideas of what potentially happened through the course of history. They really touched upon certain points, and I don't know. I think it was the combination of them both together that really made sense, because Graham is a British writer, he's a researcher, he's an amateur archaeologist potentially, but at the same time he's out there in the field doing his thing. Like, he's a little bit of a I wouldn't say necessarily a modern day Indiana Jones, but he's out there doing things. He's in the field and he's putting pieces together. But unfortunately, he's been accused of some pseudoscience and things like that, which isn't necessarily fair. And then Randall Carlson is a geologist, and he specializes in ancient geology and sacred geometry. So again, both these guys a little bit off the wall, a little bit different, but they both together tell this very intricate and interesting story. Now, like I said, with any history, it's really hard to verify. The further we go back, the less and less evidence there is. And especially now that we've had so long, as long as humans have been alive, that history has existed, obviously. And more or less any historian has studied it. So the mainstream theories that exist today, definitely are entrenched, and the people who teach them are entrenched in their thinking, and they definitely don't want to change things. So more or less, mainstream archaeology and anthropology states that human civilization is about 6,000 years old. So like modern civilization, no more fucking hunter-gatherer, no more, shit like that. Like that's like the beginning with the megalithic architecture. So like pyramids, big giant structures, Stonehenge. These are megalithic structures. And archaeologists believe that when humans started building those, that was when we had enough of a grasp of technology and things like that we actually became civilization. And really since then, things have changed, but really not that much. And that's what they think is about 6,000 years old. Now, one of the things that really cracks the crust on this entire debacle is in 1963, some archaeologists were unearthing a site in southeast Turkey, and they discovered this area that is now known as Göbekli Tepe. They ended up excavating it in 1995, but they did some dating on it, and they basically found that it was dated between 9,500 and 8,000 BC. So that's about 11,000 years old. So that's 5,000 years older than mainstream archaeology believes that human civilization even existed. Now, 5,000 years is a long time. Now, this is one thing that's really interesting about this. Like 1,000 years is almost impossible to comprehend. 100 years is very difficult to actually comprehend and understand and see. Be like, okay, from that to that, there's going to be massive change. There's going to be so many things that happen in those 100 years that how the hell are you possibly going to predict what could happen? So over 5,000 years, a lot of things can happen. And this is what I mean. Every time there's a new discovery, we just keep adding years on and on to the human story. And that just leaves more and more room for potentially different civilizations to have cropped up. And the idea is that potentially down the line, there was a civilization that was as advanced or potentially more advanced as we are today. But mainstream archaeology truly believes that we are the pinnacle of civilization, which kind of doesn't necessarily jive. And this is where Randall and Graham come in. One of the most common elements in all of ancient cultures, religions, etc., is there's a flood myth. Noah the Ark, Gilgamesh, the Indian creation myth, and Atlantis, of course. There's these ancient myths and these ancient stories of a flood that happened. And I think what happens a lot, and this is included in mainstream archaeology, is that we dismiss these myths as just truly stories, that they're just allegories, and they have no actual truth, and there's no practical application to the stories. But if you were to, if you really wanted to, if you were a people that wanted to pass on your knowledge amongst generations, or even disseminate it amongst many people, you would translate that somehow into story. Because again, this is before, well, who's to say, but maybe understanding if there was a cataclysm that happened, understanding that telling people through story and myth and using your mind, that really can't be destroyed as long as humans exist. Doesn't matter if you chisel it in stone, if you put it on a hard drive, that's always going to be destroyed. But if you remember it and you're able to tell that story, and if you put that information into a nice, neat package, into a beautiful myth, that myth is only going to be recounted accurately every time, and not a bit of the story is going to get left out, because that's what there's something innate in humans. We want to be able to tell stories. We want to be able to do that. So in encoding that information into stories, we can then pass on that information no matter what happens. Like I said, whatever. So discounting a lot of these myths, and yeah, maybe some of them, maybe there is a lot of information that's lost in the allegory, but at the same time, we can't discount the fact that, there is major evidence of a flood. And if there's all these stories talking about floods, how can that be just a coincidence? And there's newly discovered evidence that there was a major flood at the end of the last ice age, and it was called the Younger Dryas, the period of warming after our last ice age. So normally, as you come out of an ice age, it goes nice gradual, warming period. But something about the Younger Dryas, it was like it almost like reversed this course of a slight cooling period. All of a sudden shot up, and within a relatively very short time, it was only 100 years or so, like global temperatures rose like 5 degrees or something crazy, which is absolutely insane. And what Randall Carlson and others believe, this rapid warming period was actually caused by a natural disaster, a global cataclysmic event. Randall Carlson's big theory, he's a major part of it, but many others subscribe to it, it's called the Younger Dryas impact theory. And the theory is that at around 11,600 years ago, 12,000 years ago, we passed through the tail of a comet that was breaking apart, and the asteroids actually came off that tail, and asteroids actually hit like the continental glacier. So during the ice age, obviously most of the earth was covered in ice. We were all kind of like human beings. We're all living kind of around the equator, but all that area, more or less all of Canada, was covered in like 2 miles of ice, like crazy glaciers. And what the theory is that these asteroids came in and hit the glacier and flash melted it. And they think that it hit actually around like Hudson's Bay area, which is interesting. And what happened is all of a sudden all these glaciers melted instantly, flooded all the way down into any lakes that existed. This is where the Great Lakes were created. Flushed all the way down through like basically like the Great Plains in America, and all through there. There's all this evidence of these there's all this evidence of rivers and dried out areas that looked like there was massive waterfalls. Like at one point they had to dam up Niagara Falls. I guess they were doing some work or whatever, and you could see there's just this shelf and everything, and there's these areas, and it's hard to show without pictures, and I don't really, I don't really have the pictures and what have you to show this, but again, like there's these like rolling hills that, from like an aerial view, if you're looking down, you can see, and it looks like the bottom, like under, when you're at the shore at the beach and you look under the water, and the beach is just these like rolling like little like bumps. If you take an eagle eye view, that's exactly what part of these floodplains look like. So imagine just like, and they're saying like it was like thousands of feet deep, just coming through fucking icebergs, giant boulders, fucking trees, and this whole flood just ripping through, kind of coming through, destroying anything in its path. And if there was any traces of civilization, animals, whatever, even animals like all the giant bears and stuff, and giant, like there was like North American lions and shit that used to exist in North America, those would have been cheeched, completely done. So like, if this is true, and again, this giant flooding, obviously immediately all the sea level rose like crazy. So all these civilizations that were near water, near the coastline, would have been destroyed. And again, all this happened about 11,600 years ago. And you might be wondering why I'm talking about Plato. But the reason I bring up Plato is because when Plato recounted the story of Atlantis, which was actually told to his uncle by an Egyptian priest, and we all know the story of Atlantis, an ancient civilization with all this knowledge and power. Everything was great, but they angered the gods somehow, and their civilization, their city, was flooded. But they were able to send people away because they knew that this flood was coming, and they were able to send people away to different parts of the world, and they disseminated all this knowledge all over the planet. And when Plato's uncle was told this, he was there in 700 or 600 BC or something like that. But when he was told that, the ancient Egyptians told him that these floods came 9,000 years before. So that would have been 9,600 years to Plato and 11,600 years to us. So again, there's the coincidences. Yes, I get it that they might be mere coincidences and what have you, but the fact that Plato, the first real like mentioning of Atlantis, he mentions the year almost to the date of when this big, huge meltwater pulse happened and all this water came off the glaciers. Again, they're not 100% sure, but it could have been from asteroid impact, and it could have caused these major floods. And again, if there were any survivors that were living on the outskirts, and if there was Atlantean civilizations or other civilizations even close to it, maybe they did send out people. Maybe they were, survivors that traveled to places that weren't affected by the floods. Parts of Africa, parts of like the Amazon and shit like that. And they brought this knowledge with them, and they would have fucking seemed like gods to these people. If they had, if these people were living, off the land, and they weren't, particularly civilized, and maybe that led to their own survival. But these people showing up, showing people how to do things, being like, yo, what up? And every ancient culture has these depicted in artwork, these giants, bringing them, showing them different things. Like, maybe this wasn't necessarily giants in the sense physically, but intellectually, and their size in the pictures, right? Like, think about kids when they draw when they draw some people that they know, like their parents or their family or stuff, they always draw their parents huge, giant, and then them, or like even if they like a person more, they'll draw their friend bigger than their parents. And yes, I know that's a silly analogy, but at the same time, these ancient people wanted to somehow portray that these people were of utmost importance. I think, again, it's really easy to discount these myths and these stories as just that. The legend of Troy, the ancient city of Troy, they never thought that actually existed, but just recently they actually unearthed it and they found the real city of Troy. And like the same thing with the story of Atlantis, like, archaeology is such a tight-knit community, they don't want to even budge on things, so they don't even want to give any credence, they don't even want to look at some of these ideas of these myths and these stories, because they put so much work into telling the story that they have, and they want their story to be the right story, not someone else's. And, again, we falsely believe that we're this pinnacle of civilization. And I think that, you look at ancient Egypt and everything like that, they have told their story the way that they want to tell it, and they don't want to budge, and they don't want to move. And maybe this is somehow indicative too of our entire culture, that the powers that be right now are the powers that be because they choose to be, and they want to be, and they don't want to budge, and they don't want to change, and they like the way things are, and they don't know what life is going to be like past being the arbiter of truth. But the idea is right now that with technology, even just with a change in generation, there's more and more people that exist that have a more open mind, or at least just fresh eyes. Like, that's the problem, is that when you're doing things, you can get so entrenched, you can get so ingrained in how you do it, and the way you do it is the right way because you've been trying your whole life to figure out what the right way is. And when you do find that, you think, oh, now I have to stick with it. Now this is the way it's going to be. And anyone who challenges that or comes up with a new idea, you go, oh, I've already addressed that. Or no, what I've created is a way that is impervious to new ideas. And again, maybe that is commendable in the sense that you've created a system that is solid, but in itself handcuffs you. You're stuck. There's no room to, again, grow and understand that with new ideas and new technology, you can discover new things and you can rewrite history. And yeah, there's books. And yeah, but fuck, every chemistry class in high school up until grade 11 is teaching us, Bohr Rutherford, this is what an element looks like, this is blah, 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 all that shit. And then you get to grade 11 physics, and teachers go, psych, all that was bullshit, this is actually what we think. And then you get to grade 12, and they're like, oh, by the way, that was like half the story, this is even more. And basically every level, I'm sure, up until university was like, yo, psych, by the way, that was how we thought up until this fucking year. And now, like, that's how science should be. It should be, we're working on, that's why they're called theories, not laws. We're working on new things. But again, archaeology, it's not necessarily a soft science, but you're starting to border. You're starting to live in this somewhat abstract zone of this ancient history that we're only extrapolating from fucking rocks and shit that we dig up. So to dig into that idea and to really be entrenched in that seems silly. And I think that, we need to really understand that other people that aren't necessarily considered experts, and yes, for many years, experts were all that we could go to. There wasn't this amazing access to information that there is now. But I think now with this access to information, we have to start understanding that there are the people like Graham Hancock that are maybe not necessarily considered a mainstream scientist, but are weaving these pieces together in a coherent way that makes sense. And we have to understand that. We have to look at that with, I think, a little bit more of a discerning eye. And I think with more and more discoveries that are happening that do challenge mainstream theory, like Göbekli Tepe, essentially with Göbekli Tepe, they discovered that these hunter-gatherers went from hunter-gatherers to megalithic construction and architecture basically overnight. And again, there's some idea there that maybe there was this knowledge being passed around at that time. You know, the Sphinx, they're thinking it's like twice as old is what they guess. There's rain weathering on it that would have only been able to happen if there was severe rainfall, which would have only been caused by this severe weather change, which would have happened during the Younger Dryas. Pyramids all over the world, built over these aquifers, which may or may not be the same as like Tesla technology. Again, this is what I mean. We've only barely cracked the surface on all these things that all intertwine. They all tell this alternate history. And again, that idea of alternative, blah, 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 it gets cast, it gets cast in this light that, people get iffy. You're starting to get into conspiracy zones. People don't dig on that, but you got to understand that the people who do end up telling these stories and the people that do end up telling these are protecting them and that are writing this mainstream history. They're protecting themselves and they're protecting their own careers, that because they know that as soon as things are rewritten, basically what they have to say is obsolete. We're coming around and we're finding new technologies that ancient civilizations may have possessed. And the more and more we understand about our past, the more we can know about our future. And I think we can't just throw that out. We can't just throw that idea out that if we can somehow figure out and understand that maybe we aren't the pinnacle of civilization, and maybe we can have a little humility and understand that maybe at one point we did figure this out, and then a fucking asteroid came and hit us and fucked us all up. And that the people that survived tried their best to go and teach people in the jungle how to fucking, grow crops and, make who knows what kind of technology existed. And exactly right now, who knows what would happen if all of a sudden some shit went down and then all of a sudden Tesla had to go to some fucking undiscovered non-contact island that somehow, survived a cataclysm, and he's got to teach him how to build a Tesla. So who knows, man? And, people have different explanations of all these things that happen, but they happen to us. They happen to us as humans. And there's something in there, and I've talked about it before on this podcast. If there's some kind of collective unconscious or collective memory that exists, maybe there's traces of that do exist. And maybe there's, there was ways that we had figured out way back when, and we've just regressed. And maybe this has happened multiple times over history, and we've got to a point and something knocked us down a peg or two. Who knows? Maybe we'll get there someday. I know we will together. Anyway, thank you all for listening. I love all y'all. Wherever you're listening, please hit us up. Hit on our DMs, whether it's Instagram or Twitter at the Bigmark Pod or at the Bigmark Podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe to our channel. If you can, please give us a great review. 5 would be great. 5 stars really does help kind of push us up the ranks. If you do like the podcast, if you ever wanted to support, check out our Patreon, patreon.com/thebigmarkpod. And please tell a friend. If you tell one friend, we could double the podcast overnight. Thank y'all for spending some time with me, even though it was just a brief sliver in this long, long history that is human history. Thank y'all for listening. Talk to you soon. Peace.